Alex, thank you so much for that introduction. And hi, everybody. It is so good to be with you today. Kristen, Tina, the entire Students for Life team, it is great to be with you today to stand for life. So some of you may have noticed that Halsey announced her pregnancy this week. There was just so much excitement all over the internet, really all around the world, as she made that wonderful announcement after struggling with infertility and multiple miscarriages. On her Instagram, I know that this group of people noticed that she said, "I love this mini human already." All of us marching for life this week can share in her enthusiasm and particularly her observation, "I love this mini human already," because we know that that precious child is human already, just like you and I. Of course, it's also important during March for Life to always recognize, because we know as pro-lifers, that joy isn't always the emotion that women feel with the announcement of a pregnancy. Sometimes they're sad. Sometimes they're really, really scared. Sometimes they're even angry. These are all emotions that as pro-lifers we recognize. We even embrace them because that's reality, and that is part of being human, and it's part of the reality that we have to deal with if we really want to advance this movement. Our task, our mission, our vision is creating a culture, creating a community where all of those emotions can be encompassed and built together as a web of support for people who are welcoming all humans in life and in law. It's not an easy job, but that's why we're here in Standing for Life. So I've been asked today to talk with you a little bit about what the situation is here in Washington, D.C. and across the country as we're standing for life. Obviously, the results of the federal election this year were not quite what we were hoping for and very disappointing. But it's really important to emphasize that there were some very definite bright spots and pictures of hope that we can lean on as we look towards building this movement even stronger in the days ahead. Particularly important, we saw real pro-life gains in the House of Representatives, including a record-setting number of newly elected pro-life women. These women are out there all day, every day, putting the lie to this idea that somehow, as women, that we're not pro-life. Of the new 16 pro-life women, half of them, a full half, flipped what had been a seat held previously by a pro-abortion incumbent. This is a huge victory, and in no small measure that was made possible by, I know, so many of you who were working hard on the ground, doing the door knocking, doing the calls, and doing the real work that leads to those kinds of pro-life victories. So these new members of Congress can inspire all of us, and many of them have really tremendous pro-life records already from their time in state legislatures. There's a lot of them to talk about, but I want to mention one inspiring story in particular of Kat Kamick of Florida's 3rd District. She's a small business owner, and she founded a nonprofit that serves local law enforcement, first responders, and veterans. She'll be the youngest Republican woman in Congress, and she's been vocal about her own mother's brave decision to choose life, despite pressure from her doctors when she was pregnant with Kat. It's a story we hear time and time again, right? All throughout the pro-life movement. And now in the halls of Congress, there's an elected leader who knows it personally. That's going to be tremendous representation for us, and we should all take encouragement from that. Of course, we're still left with the House of Representatives that's led by a narrow, very narrow pro-abortion majority, led by Nancy Pelosi, who has committed to being completely lockstep with the pro-abortion lobby. And then, of course, over in the Senate, we now have that very disappointing 50-50 split with Vice President Kamala Harris acting as the tiebreaker as needed, which means we can no longer count on the pro-life backstop that we used to have in the upper chamber. I don't know that I need to remind this audience of how pro-abortion the Biden administration agenda is, led by President Biden and Vice President Harris. But let's just take a minute just so that there's no confusion, because they both like to present an image that's a little bit softer than what their real policy agenda is. President Biden has said, "I support a woman's right to choose. It's a constitutional right. I've supported it. I will continue to support it. And I will, in fact, move as president to see that the Congress legislates laws like that as well." And then Vice President Harris has said even more strongly, it's not an exaggeration to say women will die, poor women, women of color, because these Republican legislatures who are out of touch with America are telling women what to do with our bodies. People need to keep their hands off of women's bodies and let women make the decisions about their own lives. Her track record is pretty startling. As a member of Congress, as a United States Senator, just last year, Vice President Harris voted against a late-term abortion ban and a bill to protect born-alive infants who survive an abortion. So that's how extreme she is on this issue, and that should set our expectations for what we'll see coming from this administration. As a candidate, Biden committed to carry out the abortion lobby's radical agenda, from taxpayer funding for abortion on demand through all 9 months of pregnancy to codifying Roe v. Wade into federal law. His campaign commitments read like a Planned Parenthood wish list, and in fact, that's what it is. So even this week, just to add insult to injury, this week, President Biden issued an executive order repealing some of the Trump administration's pro-life policies. And so that's how they chose to commemorate March for Life Week. So that's the bad news, but we shouldn't despair because we have a clear-eyed preparation for the challenges to come. I served in a leadership role in the pro-life community with Americans United for Life back during the Obama administration. And one of the things we focused on there, working with Students for Life and others across the pro-life community, was pro-life legislation at the state level. And so that's going to be very much a part of our plan for this same situation. We have pro-life people all across state legislatures. In fact, that's a huge strength for our movement. And as we all know, it doesn't all happen at the federal level. So let's talk real briefly, though, before I move on to that, about what kinds of things we'll be seeing at the federal level. One of the big fights coming up, I'm pretty sure you all are familiar with this. I'm going to go over it really quickly, so touch base with Kristen and Tina if you want to know more about it. But one of the big fights is going to be over abolishing the filibuster. The Senate is right now, it's a procedural thing. It's one of those kind of boring, not sexy fights, but preserving the opportunity for people who are in the minority to have a filibuster to block things like really egregious funding for the abortion lobby is something that's very much at the top of our agenda. Without that, they could vote to repeal conscience protection laws and force healthcare providers to perform abortions against their will. They could vote to pass legislation like the so-called Women's Health Protection Act, which would effectively nullify all state-level abortion restrictions. And then other policies that are a priority for the Biden administration, such as the Equality Act, would effectively nullify existing conscience protections for healthcare providers and require taxpayer funding for elective abortions. You're noticing a theme here. We're really concerned about conscience protections and maintaining protections for religious liberty as the left is moving to define their agenda as being the only one that's not discriminatory. So finally, we have to remember that personnel is policy. One of the reasons the Trump administration accomplished so much for the cause of life was made possible by the really, really committed and tremendous pro-life people who worked across the federal government. In contrast, one of the battles coming up is the confirmation of President Biden's nominee for Secretary of Health and Human Services. Xavier Becerra has served as the Attorney General of California, is President Biden's pick to head up American healthcare. This is really interesting because his background in the healthcare space has largely been limited to opposing a partial birth abortion ban, suing nuns to force them to pay for contraception in their health insurance plan, and trying to force pro-life pregnancy resource centers to advertise for state-funded abortions. And then Kristen Clark, it's not just in Health and Human Services. See, this is what's important to understand, is that pro-life policies get enacted through regulations or repeal of regulations across the entire government. And so Kristen Clark, who is the nominee for Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, has a long track record of opposing abortion restrictions and working to expand abortion, and is expected to aggressively use the Department of justice to thwart state-level pro-life efforts. So keep an eye on nomination and confirmation battles, because that's also where the pro-life agenda gets taken forward. So at the federal level, it's imperative that we preserve the filibuster. And just last week, 200 members of the House of Representatives sent a letter committing to oppose any legislation that repeals the Hyde Amendment and other longstanding pro-life provisions in current law. Pro-life members of the Senate need to be on alert and looking to do exactly the same thing and make this public commitment to solid pro-life policy that is supported by the vast majority of Americans. Beyond that, we need to hold our policymakers true to their word. That's where we, the people, come in. All of us should be prepared to explain to our representatives right there, your local ones who are close to you at home, that life is our most basic fundamental right and it should be protected in public policy. So what does this look like at the community and state level, where our opportunities are really, really tremendous? In the last decade, states have passed over 300 pro-life laws, and that's why we have such a good landscape in front of us in terms of the legal battles that we're seeing across the country. That work is going to continue this year as state legislatures convene. Nearly 24 states have already acted to ban abortions on pain-capable unborn children after 20 weeks of gestation, and more states are poised to follow suit. Likewise, more and more states are acting to protect infants born alive after an abortion procedure and to ensure that they receive proper medical care. I mean, come on, if we as Americans can't agree on just this most basic of fact that children who are born alive should get basic care, then we really need to take a look deep in our hearts. States are also preparing to protect women from dangerous chemical abortion pills and telemedicine abortion. Keep an eye on the fights over the chemical abortions, because that is really the frontier of where the left wants to move to make abortion much more easy and accessible and much less connected to having to meet with a doctor. So the list goes on and on. Proposals to ban lethal discrimination against babies with disabilities like Down syndrome, to provide women with information about the reversing of the abortion pill process, to require abortionists to show women an ultrasound of their baby, to prohibit the gruesome practice of dismemberment abortion procedures. And of course, there are also efforts to enact trigger laws on abortion, which means that states are preparing to get ready if in either situation, whether Roe is overturned at the federal level or whether there are other things happening at the state level that need them to strengthen their laws that are already on the books. So state policymakers are really active and on the move, and that's very, very promising and encouraging. In our own communities, our commitment to the pro-life cause will continue regardless of who's in office and who's serving as elected officials. You know this. That's why you're here with us today, Standing for Life, because of your commitment to making a difference in your own communities. You know, people frequently say that pro-lifers are too focused on the law and not enough on culture, and which always surprises me, because I know from being involved in this movement and working with and beside you all that we do understand that this is a matter of the heart. And so be of good cheer as we look at the legislative process, because we know that both of these things move in tandem. We're going to continue standing for life in the public arena and working to make sure that our laws reflect a respect for human life. But we're also going to demonstrate in our own lives, and particularly right now, as we've come through this pandemic, we're still in the midst of it. There's still so many people who are out there suffering. Pregnancies for many women today are even more challenging than they have been sometimes in the past. And so we need to keep an eye out for that and to be there as a community to surround them with the love of knowing that every single life, we're already in love with that human life, and we're here to stand for life, to link arms together in the public policy process, but also to put our arms around people who are working to welcome life into their own lives. So thank you so much for being here, for being involved with Students for Life. It's wonderful to work with you and wonderful to be with you today. Thank you for standing for life.